We have a missile attack going on right now, but yeah, so maybe I will have to run. But I hope we can make it still. This is Euromaidan Press. I'm Serhiy. Today we're going to discuss the Russian-Ukrainian war with the Lieutenant General, the former Commanding General of the US Army in Europe, Ben Hodges. Hi, Ben.
Thank you for the privilege.
You've been extremely accurate with the analysis of the situation in Ukraine over the past 10 months. Early before, you suggested that the Ukrainian army may deoccupy Melitopol and Mariupol in southeastern Ukraine in January 2023. Is that correct?
What I said was that the General Staff will spend the next 2 months pounding away at the Russian logistics and transportation networks leading into Crimea. Of course, you know there's only two ways to get to Crimea, over the Kerch Bridge or the land bridge, which runs from Rostov through Mariupol and Melitopol into Crimea. And so I think as part of the preparation for the decisive phase of the campaign, which will be the liberation of Crimea, they're going to spend a lot of time knocking out or disrupting the logistical networks that are important for Crimea. That includes Melitopol and Mariupol. And Ukrainian forces are already hitting targets inside Melitopol. So to sever that land bridge, that's going to be a critical part that leads or sets the conditions for the liberation of Crimea, which I expect will be finished by the end of August.
Okay, what makes you think that the Ukrainian army may liberate Melitopol this winter? It seems like a lot of work to do.
Yeah, no, I didn't say that they could liberate Melitopol. What I said is that they will continue to hit
Okay, I get it.
transportation network that goes through Melitopol, because the key, the decisive part, is Crimea. That's the decisive part for the entire campaign. In order to do that, they have to be able to disrupt Russian logistics that go through Melitopol.
So, in your opinion, the liberation of Crimea has already started, with the operation aimed at disrupting the communication lines in Melitopol and Mariupol, right?
Well, I'm not going to say liberation, but I am going to say the disruption. So with HIMARS, drones, partisans, constant disruption of the transport. That's the key, so that the Russians cannot move new equipment, people, supplies into Crimea. In other words, the General Staff has to isolate Crimea from external support. That means continuing to block or destroy the Kerch Bridge and continuing to block the land bridge that runs through Mariupol and Melitopol.
Okay, so in this case, we have to expect new Ukrainian strikes at the Crimean bridge soon, right?
Yeah, I think the Russians, of course, are working as fast as they can to repair that bridge. And I don't know how much longer, but probably several more weeks before it's ready again. And I am sure that the General Staff is looking for other ways to revisit that bridge.
How do you think, what weapons did Ukrainian army use to strike at the Crimean bridge?
I still don't know for sure. I've seen the reports that it was a truck, that it was a drone, that who knows. But whatever it was, I mean, it was devastating and impressive. And it showed, that's what first showed me the vulnerability of Crimea. Because Crimea, before this, people talked about it as if it was some fortress, but actually, I think it's a trap. It's a trap for Russian forces there.
Yeah, it's a pretty isolated area, right? If you disrupt the communication lines, so they will be trapped there.
And because also the Black Sea Fleet is terrified of Ukrainian anti-ship missiles. That's why the Black Sea Fleet hardly even comes out. And so think about that. Ukraine doesn't even have a navy anymore, and yet the Russian Black Sea Fleet does not want to risk losing any more ships. So they stay very close to Crimea. And so, in my view, they're not much help in protecting Crimea.
Yeah, so they mainly launch missiles at Ukrainian cities right now. Okay, so the next question, do you think that we have already passed the point of no return in the Russian-Ukrainian war after the deoccupation of Kherson?
Well, I would say that Ukrainian forces have achieved irreversible momentum. I mean, there is no going back in where Russia all of a sudden has the big advantage. I just don't see any way for Russia to turn this around. Now, of course, there's many more months of hard fighting. Russians will continue to murder innocent people. And even if they manage to mobilize another 300,000 troops, we already know that they're not going to be effective combat force. They're mass. There's still a lot of people with weapons, but I am unimpressed with what I have seen so far, and the Russians have still not fixed the many problems that they have within their command structure, their logistics. They still are not doing what we call joint operations, where the Air Force supports the ground force. And so as long as the West continues to provide Ukraine what we said we would do, then I think it will not be possible for Russia to change the momentum. They may achieve some small victories in different villages and settlements, but they're not going to change the direction of this war.
So if Russia mobilizes 1 million people, for instance, there is no chance they can launch large-scale offensive operations and attack Kyiv again, in your opinion?
No, I'm sure that they are wanting to do that. But first of all, they're not going to find 1 million people. I mean, 500,000 people left Russia back in September rather than be mobilized. So they're not going to find that. And even if they did find 500,000 or 300,000 men, they don't have the equipment and the logistics for them, or the trainers or the places. I mean, you can't just magically put hundreds of thousands of people on the battlefield. I'm still not convinced that Lukashenko is going to actively support this. I think he's not a good person, but he's not stupid, and I think he can see the direction this is going, and I think he has to decide: does he want to be handcuffed to a corpse, which is the Russian Federation, or does he want to preserve his own power and have some flexibility for the post-conflict time? So I'm not convinced he's in. I don't think he wants to see all of his soldiers. I think Belarus has about 10 battalions. I think he knows that they would be destroyed very early if they went into battle against Ukraine. And I don't think the people of Belarus actually want to fight against people of Ukraine either. I just don't see that. But that's not to say that Russia won't try another invasion. But of course, now there's so many intelligence sources that Ukraine has and that your friends have that would be watching for this and that would be able to see if something like that was happening.
Okay, we were talking about the operation to deoccupy Crimea, which is closely connected to Ukrainian strikes at Russian communication lines in Melitopol and Zaporizhia region at large. But how about Kherson Oblast? Will it be more difficult for the Ukrainian army to launch offensive operations in Kherson region on the eastern bank of the Dnieper River, as crossing the river is an obstacle and Russians have already created fortifications in that area? How do you see the developments in that direction?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Um, First of all, the Ukrainian General Staff has impressed me with how thorough and methodical and professional they are, and so they will not waste people's lives doing a river crossing anywhere where they haven't done all the correct preparations. So, number one. Number two, um, if you think of the direction of Kherson as the right wing of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and then the fighting that's up in Luhansk and Donetsk as the left wing. All right, everything working towards the isolation and then liberation of Crimea. The forces that are in Kherson right now, they don't have to cross the river. I mean, they're in place where they can launch long-range strikes against Russian defenses. And I've seen video of from Ukrainian drones of these trenches that are on the east bank of the Dnieper River. I mean, these are like open, easy to see, no overhead cover. These are terrible defenses. And of course, the people that'll be in them are the untrained, recently mobilized soldiers. That's who they'll put there. And so when and where Ukraine is ready to cross a river, if they decide to do it anywhere there, they will have done all the right preparations, I'm confident. So when it's time, it'll be time. But of course, I don't know. It's not isolated. Think about what's happening in Kherson will be connected to what's happening up in from Donetsk and Luhansk.
What does Ukraine need to win this war sooner and get back all occupied territories under Ukrainian control? What weapons does Ukraine lack to achieve that?
Well, of course, the three things I think that would be most useful are exactly what President Zelensky has asked for. The longer range ATACMS, that has 300-kilometer range that could already be hitting targets in Crimea now. I think tanks like Abrams tanks or Leopards, these, of course, there's challenges for these, but still, these are capabilities that would be very useful when it's time for offensive, for the next time there's a offensive operation. And then I think whether it's drones or manned aircraft to provide long-range capability to hit targets deep inside the Russian-controlled areas, as well as to be able to go after the bases from which these missile attacks are being launched.
Russian officials hinted at the possible use of nukes against Ukraine if Ukraine attacks Crimea. Ukraine targets Russian military infrastructure in Crimea on a regular basis now, and nothing happens. Seems like Russia is running out of options to respond. How do you think why the US government refuses to give long-range ATACMS missiles to Ukraine? Does the United States fear any escalatory steps from Russia, or are there any other factors that may influence such a decision?
Yeah, this is very frustrating for me and for many other people that support Ukraine, that our government does so much, but yet there's this last little bit that they seem unwilling to do. And I can only imagine that they are overly concerned about possible escalation by Russia, which only means nuclear, because Russia has nothing else they can do. I think that the risk of Russia using a nuclear weapon should be taken seriously, but I think it is very, very unlikely, because using a nuclear weapon would not change the battlefield to the advantage of Russia. They don't have anything they could use to exploit whatever they did. And I think that I do think the General Staff believes President Biden when he said that there would be catastrophic consequences. So I think people around Putin know that there really would be catastrophic consequences, and they don't want that to happen. So That's why I think it's just unlikely they would actually do this. So now there may be other factors, something about China. I don't know. I don't believe. I think the president was incorrect when he said that he didn't want to risk breaking up the cohesion of NATO. I'm not buying that. I don't think that there's risk of Germany or France or somebody walking away if the U.S. provides ATACMS, for example.
Western allies of Ukraine seem to have some kind of psychological barrier when it comes to the delivery of tanks and fighter jets to Ukraine. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz made it clear that Germany will send tanks to Ukraine only if other NATO countries will do the same. The question is, what is the best option for Ukraine? American tanks Abrams or German tanks Leopard? And is it possible for the United States to send a small batch of American tanks Abrams to Ukraine to urge Germany to do the same?
Whether it's German tanks or American tanks or French or whatever, Ukrainian soldiers will learn how to operate them very quickly. There's no doubt about that. So it's not a training issue. It will take time to build up the maintenance support for Abrams or Leopards, but don't let that be an excuse. Just get on with it. Finally, I think there is some kind of a psychological or policy reason. The idea of tanks being perceived as offensive weapons that might lead to some unintended consequence, which I just don't understand. I completely disagree with that thinking. I have been an advocate for providing these things for a long time, and eventually, what always happens, we hesitate, then we do it, then we do it, then we do it, and there's never a escalation from the Russian side, because the Russians know that we are self-deterring ourselves, and they just have to mention the possibility, and people are overreacting to it.
Okay, the last couple of questions. Let's talk about Bakhmut, which is the hottest spot on the war map these days. How much do Russian attacks on the city reduce the capability of the Ukrainian forces to launch counteroffensive operations in other areas this winter? How the winter campaign may look like for both sides, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, it's impressive what Ukrainian soldiers have accomplished in and around Bakhmut, and what a huge price Russian soldiers are paying for the vanity of Prigozhin. I mean, that's what this is about, I believe. And of course, he doesn't care how many of his soldiers are killed, since they were released from prison, they're untrained. I mean, all kinds of different people. So at some point, that they run out of bodies. But there's no strategic or significant operational advantage for the Russians if they capture Bakhmut. It would be fun. They could finally say, we finally captured something, we finally liberated something. But in terms of real significance, I don't see it. I can't see it. It may be there, but I can't see it. I'm more interested in what Ukrainian forces are doing other places, like direction of Crimea and Severodonetsk.
Calls on Ukraine to enter the negotiations with Russia have resumed after Ukraine's successful counteroffensive in Kherson, most recently voiced by the US Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley. They are refused by Ukrainian officials. In your opinion, what would be the right time for Ukraine to enter the negotiations with Russia, if any?
After Crimea is liberated.
Okay, so you said that Crimea would be liberated in August. Do you still believe?
By the end of August, that's correct.
2023, right?
Yeah.
So, and one last question, how long do you think this war will last?
That I don't know, but Ukraine will never be secure or safe or able to rebuild its economy as long as Russia controls Crimea. So that's the key. Once you have Crimea back, then I think the other things will there will be so much internal friction inside the Kremlin that they will start eating themselves.
Okay, thank you for this interview. Hope to see you again. Thank you.
Please be safe, you and your family and your colleagues, okay?
Thank you. Thank you. See ya. Bye.